I've done a lot of work with people that have fungal and parasite infections, and I've had to heal myself from various parasite infections, and have had a chronic fungal infection. I got a deep fungal infection, which means it actually gets through the intestinal wall into the body. And once you have one of those, you can never get rid of it. You have to manage it. I've never seen anyone or known of anyone that could say they cured a deep fungal infection. I say, if they have, I say, here, eat this lollipop and watch what happens. And here it comes. And so, having analyzed the diets of probably thousands of people and looking at what parasites they had, and one of the most common parasite infections is worm parasites. Mm-hmm. And what I did is I researched all these different parasites, and one of the things that I found is worm parasites are very high in C-reactive proteins, which are also called shock proteins, which our cells use to have elasticity. And then I thought, I'm looking at the diet logs, and most of these people are just eating crap food, microwave cooked, overdone, commercially farmed garbage food. And you could see that their skin didn't have much elasticity to it. You get the kind of the California beach babe that's burnt, the wrinkled kind of 42-year-old California beach girl whose skin looks like she's 60 because she's brown and spent too much time in the sun, but her skin got cooked,
Yep.
And so I begin to wonder, would the body harvest parasites for fresh, raw protein, especially an animal like a worm with C-reactive protein? And because the parasites are living organisms, they're going to have a lot of enzymes in them because they're raw. And so I spoke to this with a very, very famous scientist, soil scientist, and scientist of a number of types, a guy named Philip Callahan, who's done all sorts of great research, and I won't go into it, it'd be a long story. And I also spoke to Arden Anderson, who wrote the book Science and Agriculture, and he's a rare guy because he's an osteopathic physician, and he's got a PhD in soil science, and he worked for the United States Air Force taking care of pilots as a medical doctor, but he's also a consultant and expert in soil science. And both of them said, you got a good theory there. I don't know if it's right, but it seems very, very logical. So as you were talking, I was just wanting to share that, when people eat these deficient diets and they're not getting enough enzymes, they're not eating food with enzymes, they're cooking too much. And another one that I find is a big problem is pasteurized foods, because the pasteurization by definition means all enzymes are dead. Mm-hmm. So the only way you can run something like that through mouth to anus is to suck the enzymes right out of your body. Aaron Fried Pfeiffer said in about 57 that most people's enzyme pathways were depleted by about 32 to 35 years of age, based on his research. And he was trained by Rudolf Steiner, and he was considered to be the first biochemist in the United States, the original biochemist. And his lectures are excellent. Even today, if you were to listen to him, you'd hear this guy lecturing in 1957 and go, wow, if this guy was on stage today, he'd be considered a badass dude. So I just think that, as you're talking and we're talking about these enzymes, I think there's a lot of connections that a lot of people don't make. And you can run around chasing and parasite kill, but I've watched people get 10 parasite infections in a row because they're not changing their diet, or they're not changing their rest habits, or they're not changing the foundational principles to support the immune system. And they keep, shopping for more supplements and more herbs and more bugs, but more drugs or whatever, but they're not really addressing the actual issue. And I think part of the reason I bring that up and I share it with my students in classes is Mother Nature has got many very elaborate systems for balancing us. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, I found several research studies showing on multiple occasions when researchers would infect themselves with certain parasites, that ailments that they'd had for years would clear up. Then when they would kill the parasites, the ailment come back. One of them, one researcher had Crohn's disease. And when he infected himself with hookworm, the Crohn's disease completely cleared up. Then when he killed the hookworm, the Crohn's disease came back. And I found several papers showing this kinds of stuff. And so I tell people all the time, be careful about thinking this is just a supplementation issue.
Mm-hmm.
You got to look at what's really missing in your diet and what's missing in your lifestyle so that you can handle this thing with a circumferential view. And I think, that you and I think along the same lines that way.
Yeah, that's part of it comes, I think, too, is what we talked earlier about education, and there is a pattern in people who are chronically suffering, I think, become identified as a victim, and they subtly continue to choose methodologies to stay broken.
Yes.
As opposed to accepting full responsibility
Yeah.
for what's going on in their life, being at peace with what's going on and saying, this is an opportunity for learning. I'm getting feedback telling me what I'm currently doing in my life isn't working.
Mm-hmm.
And can I let go of what I think I know to learn what
I need to learn?
right? And to continue on. And of course, there's no greater addiction than having a healthy body. It feels wonderful. It feels magical.
And not to mention that learning by definition is a measure of one's capacity to change their behavior.
Yes.
You can have a knowledge full of ideas about diet and lifestyle, but if you can't change your behavior, all you've got is a log of ideas in your head, and now you're just, a walking computer, and computers don't eat.
Correct.
Except electrons.
Correct. And so, coming full circle, that's what led us to kind of go down that road. And if we go back to the digestive piece, where we are in those immediate cleaving of the amino acids first, and as well as the other, we have there's 17 different enzymes. We don't have to go into all the different ones that some break down fiber, some break down dairy products, some break down fats, lipases, and things like that. And so once that chime is completed, hopefully you have enough hydrochloric acid inside the body, which most people don't. Most people don't.
Yeah, that's a major cause of parasite problems.
I ran into that problem. Oh, yeah. So I had literally been on the enzyme program for a decade, this was even more than that, and taking my probiotics. Didn't take HCl because I started this as a younger fellow, and I got a little older and my hydrochloric acid production goes down. I was in Bali, contracted a parasite. Katrine, my genetic expert, I sent some tests to her, and she's like, "Oh, you got a hitchhiker." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? I got this parasite." Well, I had a crazy experience. I ended up experimenting with some electronic technology. Apparently the parasite was in my gallbladder. I zapped it. It ran up my nervous system and started eating my eye.
Yeah, that can happen.
And almost lost my eye out of it.
Toxocara is a eye lover.
Yeah, and fortunately I was able to save it thanks to my eye doctor and my chiropractor who figured out what was going on in Katrine. And so she said, "Well, Wade, that's just testament that your hydrochloric acid," and of course me going, "Katrine, I'm the digestive health guy. How's that possible? Like, geez." And she's like, "Well, hey, man, I'm just looking at the results. Are you open?" So I started taking hydrochloric acid in addition to my process, and bang, it was significant. I noticed a really big improvement. So I was like, "Oh, I guess I'm at that age that, hydrochloric acid." So that's the next piece.
Can I interject?
Yeah, please.
You mentioned earlier that the hydrochloric acid usually doesn't come out for about an hour. There's a caveat there.
Go ahead.
As soon as you drink coffee, you start producing hydrochloric acid.
Yeah.
So when people are drinking coffee with meals or right before meals, they're completely disrupting the normal cycle of hydrochloric acid enzymatic interactions. And I first learned this on our farm because, cows will sometimes eat metal and pieces of fences. And every now and then we'd have to call in the vet, and they would stick a magnet all the way down their throat and try to get into their stomach. And I've seen them pull out like foot-long pieces of barbed wire. I'm like, how in the fuck did they even swallow that? But what happens is when they get metal or objects like that in the stomach, it traumatizes the stomach, and they can't produce hydrochloric acid in reaction to the stress. And so then they stop digesting properly, and they get diarrhea and all sorts of shit, and they stop producing milk. So I remember being there with the vet, and the vet said to my dad, "Could you please go make me the strongest pot of coffee you've ever made?" And my dad said, "Sure." And he said, "Bring it to me." And he said, when it's done, put some ice in it to cool it down. And then my dad, I wonder what the hell he's going to do with this pot of coffee. He thought maybe the vet was really tired or something. Well, the vet squeezes the cow's jaw to force the cow to open its mouth, puts a block of rubber between his teeth, picks the cow's head up, and pours the entire pot of jet black coffee into the cow's stomach. And my dad said, "What in the world is that for?" And he said, "This triggers hydrochloric acid production in the stomach." So I first learned that from a vet. And then having worked with many patients that had stomach ulcers, I found one of the most common things that stomach ulcer patients do is they drink coffee, particularly black coffee, on an empty stomach first thing in the morning, and they have hydrochloric acid. Many of them are dehydrated, so the mucous membrane shrinks and it can't get protected, and they're overproducing hydrochloric acid, so it actually burns the cells in the stomach out, and then they can't produce hydrochloric acid because they've burned out the cells.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. That's accurate. And of course, then on that second stage coming out of the intestinal tract, that's when your mineral content bicarbonate buffers need to buffer that acid to get that pH back up to a more neutral level, or you get into that's where people get into the duodenal ulcers and things like that when you're getting a spillover effect. So if you don't produce enough hydrochloric acid, the esophageal sphincter stays open and you splash up and you get heartburn and acid reflux. It's not because of too much acid, it's because you're not making enough. And they put people on proton pumps.
One of the most common misdiagnoses I see is people come to me with reflux and they've been put on antacids. And the first thing I say to them, I said, "We got to test you for parasites then."
Yeah.
Because if you are on antacids, you're shutting down whatever hydrochloric acid you had in there. And almost everyone that I've ever seen, I used to do Heidelberg capsule tests on people all the time. I never met a single person that was producing even close to normal amounts of hydrochloric acid that were put on antacids. So basically what they're doing is just using a sort of a formula. If you got these symptoms, take this product, but they don't really know what's happening, and it sets people up for serious parasite problems because the hydrochloric acid is the number one defense against any kind of living organism coming in that you shouldn't have in your body.
Yeah, it's a big part of your immune system to wipe out pathogenic organisms. And then that final stage, it goes into the food will then transit out, it gets buffered and goes into your intestinal tract, and that's where the flora start to work on it. The good and I always say there's 10% good, 10% bad, and 80% opportunists as far as bacteria goes, and depending on your lifestyle.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I love that film.
My father was the special effects man on that film.
Oh, I watched that movie with my dad, so it was one of my first Westerns that I remember.
Yeah.
So, and then, of course, now today with the reduction of the amount of organisms that we naturally get, because when I grew a carrot in the garden, or my parents did, you take it out, you brush a little dirt off it, and you eat it, and the bacteria that are connected to that come with it.
Even if you wash it in the hose, there's still dirt in the cracks. I mean, you can see it. We grow our own produce at home, but we also get a delivery from an organic farm, and so it comes, and there's still some dirt on it. But I give it a quick. Like if I'm eating one myself or my kid, I don't try to super wash it or scrub it. I just surface clean it and hand it to Mana to chew or me to chew, and you're still getting a nice regular dose of probiotics, but that's not something you want to do from a commercial farm.
Right. And then of course all this, what we've developed in the modern world, we've created these amazing antibiotic remedies.
Anti-life.
But then we've overused them outside. And of course, the fellow that originally developed antibiotics was concerned that there would be an overprescription of them over time. And now we're at a state where we have these bacteria or antibiotic resistant strains of bacteria, superbugs. Because anytime you try to exterminate any species,
they just adapt.
They adapt.
Yeah.
And now we're in sort of medical situations. So I have a friend who is a world-class surgeon, put the first stent in the body. And he said, the interesting thing, he says, surgery's come so far in the last 30 to 40 years. He says, it blows him away what they can do now. He says, the difference is now 50% of the people who don't have successful surgery is not because the surgery wasn't successful, it's because they got infected in the hospital with one of these bacteria or antibiotic resistant strains bacteria cultures, and that becomes a problem. And so those three areas, not enough enzymes present in the food, and as you age, Dr. Howell talked about how you have an enzymatic pool that begins to diminish over time. And he showed with other different species how by third generation of enzymatically deficient diets, they developed genetic-based diseases, strange sociological behavior, and the inability to procreate.
And you see this in Pottinger's cats as well.
That's exactly it.
Because he cooked their food.
Correct.
And he showed that, I think it was by the third generation, the cats even lost their sexual preference. The males were trying to have sex with males and females with females. He showed you could throw the cats in the air and they couldn't land on their feet. They would just crash. And you could, hurt them because they lost their balance and sense of spatial orientation. Their anthropometrics were disrupted, so the rate of head to body size or limb to torso size, and that's pretty serious when you consider that a lot of that comes from killing enzymes.
Well, think about when you look at when we talked earlier about the development of modern food production and distribution. We've been on that chain very heavily since World War II. And now we're into third generation.
Yes, I tell my students all the time, you are the third generation, your kids are the fourth generation, and the fourth generations didn't survive in Pottinger's study.
And what do you see? You see an explosion of genetic-based diseases. You've seen sociological behavior which is not supportive of humans. And you see all of these fertility clinics going up everywhere because people don't have the ability to procreate.
And I tell them, if you can't procreate naturally, and you go to a fertility clinic and you don't change the prerequisite factors that will make you fertile, chances of you giving birth to a child that's got serious problems and chaining you to a very tough life as a parent is very, very real. Now, there are some people, of course, that have genetic issues that stop them from fertility. In other words, not everyone is a diet and lifestyle case. So for those people, I say do whatever you want to do and need to do to become parents and share that beautiful experience with the world. But many, many people have hired me because they had issues and the husband and wife couldn't get pregnant. It was either one of them or both of them. And 100% of them within 6 months is the longest it's ever taken me, just following what I teach in my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, and my 4-doctor model. And, other specific modifications, whether it be enzymatic products or key nutritional supports or, body therapies or breathing practices. But in general, it's all just returning our bodies back to the natural rhythms and eating the natural foods that are necessary for it. And you see that a lot of this stuff isn't necessary. But as you know, the dragon in the details here is that this is highly profitable. So the medical system's not going to teach you how to eat. It's not going to tell you what this stuff's coming from because it would kill their business. It's a disease maintenance business system. And so if we don't, pay attention to what we're doing and we keep kind of doing what we've talked about, letting your schooling get in the way of your education, then the pain teacher shows up with quite great vengeance.
And that's where a lot of people have found themselves, regardless of the dietary practice they're following, because of the fundamental assumption that everything in that digestive system is working. And that's, if there's any message that I want to get out today, is that, hey, is your digestion system actually working the way it was designed and natural to do? And if it is, you should be able to be successful on almost any type of diet. If it's in its optimal state.
Yes, you should be able to do that. But one, there's always feedback indicators such as mental clarity, energy levels, sleep quality, cognition quality, skin quality, recovery from exercise. I mean, the body's always telling you and giving you a report card, but we're so in such a culture that just keeps drugging anything that you have to be a bug bites your nose and the next thing you know you're on a drug. I mean, everybody's trying to avoid the feedback loop, which is just like the most dangerous thing in the world. So though I from my own experience, I teach a system of metabolic typing that's totally based on working with your body, using muscle testing and connecting to your soul and logging your symptoms against what you eat. So you can correlate symptoms against foods taken in, drinks taken in, supplements taken in. And between that muscle testing and soul connection, you get the guidance that you need. And people say to me all the time, well, what is your diet? I say, well, it depends. If I did deadlifts yesterday, it's very carnivorous for about 2 days. But if I haven't worked out in 2 days, I can eat a vegetarian diet and feel fantastic. In fact, if I eat a bunch of meat, I feel all clogged up, foggy-headed, dull, like someone threw a wet blanket over my head. So what I've found is that we are very, very dynamic, and that if we listen to our body, we can find out that you'd actually have to read every diet book on the shelf, because otherwise you would be narrowing your responses back. And then we've got the issues of our biochemistry is constantly changing, the environment's constantly changing, stress factors. So if all of a sudden you need nutrients that are only available in leafy greens, but you're on a carnivore diet, well, guess what? You're going to have to eat a lot of frickin' pounds of meat to get what comes out of kale or collard greens or whatever. But I think that if we work with our bodies and we pay attention, that yeah, we can not. I'm agreeing with you and saying yes, we can eat about any type of diet when we're healthy. But I'm also saying that it's not just as simple as eating any type of diet, just like willy-nilly. It means tapping in and saying, well, what does my body need versus what does my programmed mind have an addiction to?
Well, you